Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mindful webinar. I'm Bryan Welch, CEO at Mindful Communications, and it's my huge honor today to have as a guest Diana Hahn, Chief Medical Officer for Unilever, a company that generates between 50 and 55 billion euros a year in revenue and operates in over 190 different countries. Diana, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Bryan.
And thanks to all of you for joining us also. It's a great thrill and an honor to get to talk to you all and to be with people like Diana. Go ahead and send us questions in the Q&A section anytime during the webinar. We might not have time to answer all of them, but we're interested in having a conversation. Diana, prior to joining Unilever, was Chief Medical Officer at GE Appliance, and she's served in similar roles in several very large blue chip companies. She is, I believe, an OBGYN by training, right, Diana?
Wow, internist. Close enough.
An internist?
Mm-hmm.
But you've delivered some babies.
I have. Not in a while, but I have. Sometimes at work, although I try not to do that.
Sometimes at work. You mean as
right.
chief medical officer, you've delivered a baby?
That's a story for another day, but it has happened.
Well, I kind of wish it was a story for today. That sounds like a beauty.
It's like riding a bicycle. A lot of box breathing during that episode.
Oh, that's great. So for the benefit of all of us, what does a chief medical officer in a giant multinational consumer product company actually do?
Well, that's a great question, Bryan. And I think the reason why I'm with Unilever is that I can do anything and everything that makes sense with respect to supporting our employees, their families, the communities we serve, and also our brands as well, because Unilever itself over the last several years has been leaning in much more in terms of health and well-being products. And so the chance to serve consumers when it comes to health and well-being is part of the all duties as assigned part of the job description. But in a nutshell, I am responsible for the health of our global populations around the world. And as you mentioned, we operate in a lot of different countries. So and we are a true multinational. And to date, about 60% or so of our revenue is outside the US, and we operate in a lot of low and middle income countries. So it's been such a joy, especially in the COVID era, to be able to really take on public health in the most good old fashioned sense, as well as, of course, employee health and well-being as well. And so any and all things that touch the health of our population falls within the remit of my team.
Now, Unilever is widely recognized as a company that's made huge investments and a big public commitment to the social impact of its operations. It sounds like that becomes part of your mandate, part of your assignment as well. How does that work? I mean, in what ways does the chief medical officer address the health of the communities in which Unilever operates?
Yeah, so our purpose as a company is to make sustainable living commonplace. And so if you just listen to that phrase very literally, it is ensuring that the products that we bring to market, which includes everything from foods and refreshments to products that help consumers the world over, clean their homes and provision hygiene for themselves and their families, our suite of products that support health very directly, so vitamins, minerals, supplements, and the fact that you're absolutely right, we are very much a leader before it became fashionable, even in global sustainability. And obviously we all know that that's even more important than ever before, especially with COP26 going on right now. We've articulated very clearly a public position in terms of what our goals are with respect to the health of the planet, the quality of life for the people on this planet, and to know that we have a responsibility to do good while we're doing well. And so then where it touches my team and our work is that, of course, our employees live in communities all over the world and are impacted by what happens locally and hyper locally. And so when we operate in a country, in a community, very much our mission extends beyond our four walls, not only to what we provision for health and well-being in the workplace, but of course, knowing that an employee's health and well-being extends very much into what's happening environmentally as well. And so certainly social determinants of health would be a great example of something that we have tackled for a long time now, but have been tackling at much greater speed and depth around the world. And it's very much been the case that COVID-19 and just the COVID era that we will live in for, I think, for a long time to come yet, in that very long tail of COVID, that we have to invest in the communities that we serve. And so whether it's in India and other LMICs and bringing our hygiene products very proximately upstream to educate and engage with parents as they are expecting their children, when they're very receptive to conversations about health and hygiene and vaccination and doing our part there, whether it's tying in telehealth services as something that we provision for employees who purchase our soap products. For example, our Lifebuoy team has done a tremendous job bolting on telehealth to the products that we sell. Those are just a couple of examples to the work that we do with the large global NGOs, whether it's the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Gates Foundation, many other NGOs around the world, and just truly leaning into the responsibility that a corporation has to the health of its employees, their families, and the communities that we serve. And so our team supports all of those efforts.
So could we get super granular about that and just describe to me what experience I might have as a consumer in India buying a Unilever product? What would these enhancements look like to me at ground level? Is there a number on the back of the package, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to purchase a Lifebuoy product, you would potentially be able to actually leverage a telehealth service, so that it's not just, hey, I can wash my hands with this soap I just purchased, but potentially there might be someone sick in the household with COVID, for example. And that's why all of a sudden I'm paying a lot more attention to this particular product at this time and making this specific purchase. And of course, if I'm standing there about to make a purchase, there's a lot of soap in the marketplace and a lot of hygiene products in the marketplace. But how would we potentially differentiate ourselves is have partnerships that can provision complementary resources that we can put into the hands of our consumer. And similarly, and along the same lines, parents who are expecting children, to the example that I referenced earlier, we could have a conversation about why hygiene is so incredibly important to health, but at a time when we're not just yet one more party talking at the parents, but they are maximally receptive, because of course all parents are best for their children.
So how is that connection then actually made? Is there a website on the label of the product? Do I get an email from you because I registered, because I bought some Lifebuoy? How does it work at that level?
It's executed in different ways in different countries, Bryan. So this is one of the things that's always so interesting about being a true multinational. It literally depends on the market that you're in, the country, in terms of the execution. But certainly a QR code would be, one example. That could be something on the back of a package that directs you to a particular site, or in some parts of the world, a particular phone number. And so the granular execution literally depends on whatever geography that you may be in.
I see. Cool. Um, then the other part of your responsibility at Unilever is supporting and enhancing the health of the workforce.
Yes.
How many people work for Unilever? There are about 400 Unilever brands or something like that, right?
Oh my goodness, I've lost count. We certainly have our mega brands, and then we have brands, in different geographies. And some of our brands actually are known by different names in different markets. So, for example, deodorant would be an example where in the U.S. Consumers here would know us as, Degree, but in the U.K. it might be the same product or same-ish product, but known as Rexona. So we do have lots and lots of brands across lots of segments for consumers, but we have about 140, 50,000 employees today.
And how does your responsibility manifest itself then across that workforce?
Yep. And so I lead the global health and well-being team. And so as the global part of the title implies, I do have cross geography responsibilities. And so my team will then partner. So it's bi-directional always, when you are part of a multinational, of course, there is no such thing as a one size fits all strategy, nor is there a one size fits all execution, as we were talking about in the consumer context, for how we do what we do when it comes to supporting health and well-being. But we spend a lot of time listening, understanding, speaking with our teams, reading in terms of trends on the ground, and then simply then work through what a global strategy is, what the priorities may be for health and well-being, and then to develop key core capabilities, particularly from the digital side as well as the service partnership side. And then our teams, so I have teams on the ground in different geographies. Those teams would then take that co-created strategy and the co-created set of capabilities, but then customize for what is particularly relevant for the segment of employees on the ground in a particular market. And so whether it's making sure it's culturally sound and will resonate, linguistically, of course, it has to be aligned to our populations locally as well. And so it's very collaborative. And that's one thing that is really, to be honest, incredibly rewarding. It's not a top-down approach to setting the strategy for health and well-being. It is very much collaborative and bidirectional and constant sensing and listening directly to our workforce in terms of whatever their needs may be. And it very much varies depending on the geography.
Could you give us an example of what the health and wellness program looks like in one of the Unilever companies that you're familiar with, that just to give a sense of how it's being implemented for the employees?
Yep. So the part of the strategy that is uniform across the portfolio and across the geographies is whole person health. Obviously, that's not a new concept. It's certainly that connection of mind, body, community, purpose, environment. And so an example of something we've launched in my first year at Unilever is we have a whole person health initiative in Latin America. That is particularly focused on nutrition. And while all the components of health are represented, so physical health, mental health, which is a huge area of focus for us even before the pandemic, but even more so now. But the reason we selected nutrition in particular as an area of focus in Brazil and Mexico, our initial sites of launch, is because we took a look at the data with respect to, in this case, obesity and cardiometabolic disease. And we were really worried at what the data showed as far as population characteristics. So when we looked at public health data in both of these countries, Mexico and Brazil, we saw that at a population level, something like 70-ish% or thereabouts of a given community had numbers that certainly met criteria for obesity. And then when we looked at our workforce, and this is where our health and well-being teams come into play, we have physicians, nurses, nutritionists, other allied health professionals interacting with our workforce. And of course, we have our divisions and our brands, which are in nutrition as well, and really in nutrition, but very focused from a strategic standpoint on future foods and more plant-based eating as an example. This is where, again, there's a convergence in terms of what we're trying to do to support our employees and their families, and what Unilever is trying to do to support global consumers. And so here, the execution of whole person health included working with big NGOs like GAIN, for an example, and focused on making sure that we could benchmark against nutrition standards, and then from there assess ourselves with respect to our work sites and the quality of nutrition that we were providing to our workforce, many of whom were, of course, eating breakfast, lunch, or at least lunch or dinner with us, and to ensure that from a nutritional profile standpoint, that we were adhering to the very best of standards of nutrition for the workforce. But again, coming back to health obviously cannot just begin and end in the workplace. This is where involving families and ensuring that we are deploying digital technologies to complement face-to-face services. So even if we're not feeding an employee on site at a factory, for example, that we can engage with their partner at home and their kids with respect to teaching, recipes that incorporate healthy ingredients, are easy and quick to prepare. And this is where we worked with our Unilever Food Solutions chefs to deploy their expertise, but to, in this case, deploy it inward to teach families how to prepare healthier foods and to eat at home more. And so this is
like cooking classes, cooking classes on sites, things like that.
Virtually as well. And similarly, when it comes to physical activity, being really sensitive to what the populations in this country enjoy. And so dance is actually a big part of the culture. And so as an example, from a programming standpoint, there are all sorts of group activities and classes, Latin dancing, that sort of thing, that our employees really gave us feedback that they love. And when, obviously from a distance, I live here in the US, for me to be able to have a virtual line of sight to these classes, to these employees, and to see the joy, in terms of moving their bodies and being able to participate in a way that was really culturally resonant, is very much what we focus on, is ensuring that it's appropriate for a population, interesting for a population, that certainly drives engagement and stickiness as well.
Have you joined in the Brazilian dancing at any?
I do love to dance, I have to say. It's when my daughters have seen it when they're home, let's just say they have quite a bit of fun with it.
I'll bet.
Yes.
What about mindfulness? Since that's always one of our favorite subjects here. Are there mindfulness programs within Unilever? You're a meditator, aren't you?
I am. So both individually and at an organization level, mindfulness, emotional well-being has just been something we focused on for years and years and years. Well before the pandemic, mental health has been very important. I mean, we certainly saw what the global public health data showed. We certainly heard from our employees, because we do a lot of sense checking with our employees. We're in touch with our employees on a monthly basis, so incredibly regular insights. And we knew that emotional well-being is incredibly important. And so we've launched a number of different initiatives, mindfulness being one of them. We're training our employees and actually putting them through a curriculum so that they develop skills And then it's going to become the trainer model. We've trained, God, close to 4,000 mental health champions just in the past year alone, so that
Wow.
our employees are never more than, one touch away from a peer when it comes to support. Obviously, there's global EAP, but there's nothing more impactful than potentially being able to reach out to a colleague who understands your environment and the stresses that you're under from a professional standpoint, but also from a human standpoint as well. And then we've also launched tools for teams, knowing that a lot of health and well-being is very interdependent on what's going on with a team. Certainly we're interacting with our teams as much as our families, Monday through Friday, and in some parts of the world, other days of the week as well. And then focusing on team energy and psychological safety. So these are all initiatives that we have been hard at work on, and we do not believe in just running discrete campaigns, and it's a campaign of the day or a campaign of the year. These are commitments that we've made for some years now, and each year we continue to build a stronger foundation and expand the breadth of our reach to our workforce and the depth of our support as well.
Is it
And so,
challenging? Is it challenging to get employees around the world from so many different cultures engaged in mindfulness activities in particular?
I have to say, it hasn't felt that way for our teams. We have found a real hunger for this kind of support. And it's actually been, in fact, relatively easy to bring these initiatives forward. Our leadership team is incredibly supportive of these initiatives, recognizing the need globally to make sure that we're equipping as many of our employees as possible with the skills, to be present, mindful, especially in these incredibly difficult times we've all lived through as a global community these last couple of years. And so it hasn't been difficult. We've tended to get traction relatively quickly, but I honestly think that's because we've been on this journey now for several years, well before the pandemic. So these are not new concepts to us or to our workforce, and we talk about it all the time.
Are there metrics Unilever's been involved in mental health activities for its employees for a number of years. Are there metrics that you follow to look for evidence that those programs are beneficial?
Yeah, the metric probably that we can report on the most consistently comes directly through the voices of our workforce. And so I mentioned that we sense and connect with our workforce really, really regularly. So literally every month we are sense checking with the workforce. And a lot of the questions are very focused on health and well-being, and we assess directly from our employees, do you feel that you are able to speak up when there is a challenge from a mental health, emotional well-being standpoint? The tools for teams and our team energy tools are all focused on psychological safety and scoring what a baseline would be for a team at T0, and then obviously at any T1 that a team can choose to reassess and look at itself. We do look at the progression over time, and for the bottom 30%, those are teams that get extra coaching from our well-being team. And so we've seen the metrics improving throughout the pandemic, which we're really happy about, because these have been, of course, very challenging times that we've all lived and operated under.
For sure. Mindfulness training in particular, how do you deploy that? I probably hard to generalize across a company the size of yours with its diverse geography, but it's as an example of how a company can deploy a mindfulness program for the benefit of its employees.
Yes, so we have partnerships here from a training standpoint. So it is actually live training with an expert. So it's very experiential. So it's not just, hey, watch a video or read a blog, even though we have plenty of that as well. There's also content that can be consumed. But I was referencing earlier our mindfulness champions that we put through. These are individuals who've gone through pretty intensive, comprehensive training so that they emerge from that training having been through the experience of, and there's sort of lots of exercises, of course, that those individuals go through, and then they will then from there train the trainer. And that's been a very common model of ours, Bryan, is when we roll these initiatives forward to try to tackle them with pretty significant depth and to equip people pretty deeply with the skills that they need.
Yeah. And it's, I assume the mindfulness programs are optional for the employees. Is there any sort of mandatory element of it all, or is it just something that's offered and then people show up?
So that's an answer that has two components. So Unilever has embedded within its leadership framework our standards of leadership. And within the standards of leadership are, of course, presence and mindfulness. And so we actually assess our workforce, particularly at the management level, on these standards of leadership. And so there's a whole very formal process around that. And so obviously, one of the things we do need to do is to embed the appropriate curriculum that then maps to these particular standards of leadership, which includes, of course, what we call the inner game. So it's in that sense, it's very formally embedded and organically embedded in the process. Now, in terms of if someone doesn't join mindfulness course and training and doesn't become a mindfulness champion, are there consequences? No, I mean those kinds of initiatives where we deeply train individuals are voluntary. But the leadership skills that are necessary in order to progress a career very much includes the skill sets that mindfulness addresses, and leaders are assessed against that.
That's incredibly, and I had no idea, and it's incredible. So if I'm a plant manager of a manufacturing facility in Eastern Europe somewhere, am I aware that those skills of mindfulness, that the qualities of mindfulness are virtually a performance variable for me?
I would say so. I mean, that should be fairly well known because, again, we have the standards of leadership have been articulated very clearly. They're not, brand new by any means. They predate the pandemic as well. And so certainly even for me, I'm a year into my tenure at Unilever. Before I joined during the interview process, I was made aware of our standards of leadership and which very clearly articulates the importance of that mind-body connection and attending to the mind and body as a prerequisite and an enabler, if you will, of good leadership. And we have training, our learning and development team, they've done an amazing job at developing a curriculum to support and enable those skills. And when we have conversations about performance, we are very much incorporating conversations about health and well-being very formally.
And how would you articulate the values of mindfulness practice to leadership, to health? How do you articulate those benefits?
Yeah, so I think there's about a million different definitions, if not more, of mindfulness out there. And
At
so
least,
for me,
yeah.
At least. So for me, when I think about mindfulness, I think about it this way. It is really the interactions and connectivity across the mind, the body, and the environment as well that then enable calmness and clarity. So that's how I think about it. I think in this COVID era that we will continue to live in for some time, where there's so much uncertainty, there are so many crises, there's so much paradox that we ask any individual human being to be able to process and digest and make sense of every day. A state of calmness and the clarity that results, I think, is incredibly both enabling as well as empowering from a quality of life standpoint and quality of health standpoint, which then clearly translates over to business performance. So when I see leaders who are successful and really amazing, inspirational leaders, it's almost always the case when you chat with them that they absolutely practice mindfulness very deliberately every single day, because it takes work, and it takes work for a very long time. I mean, one day it does become more natural and it doesn't feel like work anymore. It's as natural as breathing. But I would say that calmness and clarity that results from mindfulness practice is a huge, huge, huge gift at the human level. And then obviously when you roll up a lot of humans together who are driving a business at that level as well.
Is it possible to meditate at work in some of Unilever's offices and plants?
Yeah, absolutely. We, whether it's a manufacturing environment or an office environment, it's very much been the case that we have quiet zones our employees can retire to. And as we are designing our offices for the future of hybrid working, we are literally formally including in the design process the physical infrastructure necessary to support the practices of mindfulness.
What happened to the old industrial engineering beliefs around staying at your desk and keeping your nose to the grindstone? This
Oh
idea
my goodness.
of a quiet place for employees to go to take a break.
Yeah, no, again, in the year I've been with Unilever, I have never encountered any of that mindset at all. And again, this is where the years of investment and belief systems that are very core and very real. I think we've probably, if there are individuals who feel that way, let's put it this way, I haven't met them.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
how do you think Unilever became the kind of company it is? I mean, I've been aware of Unilever for years, in part because I became aware that it had certified numerous of its companies as B corporations,
That's
a
right.
process that's very rigorous, can be very expensive. And at
Mhm.
the end of the day, you're being judged by B Lab for how socially and environmentally responsible your practices are in
Mhm.
public, which isn't
Mhm.
something a lot of companies go for. And certainly no other consumer products company on the scale of Unilever even approaches its social conscience and its environmental practices. It sounds expensive. I mean, how did a huge company like Unilever become a leader in that way?
Well, I think this probably starts at the origins of our business. And so I was just in the UK a couple of weeks ago, and I visited a place near Liverpool called Port Sunlight. So Port Sunlight is where the Unilever business originated in the late 1800s, when Lord Lever founded a company that makes soap. And so
The dude,
Port Sunlight,
there was a dude whose name was Lever.
yes,
I didn't
indeed.
know
His last
that.
name was Lever, and eventually he became a lord, as I understand it.
It's awesome.
Um, yes, and so when he founded this soap factory in Port Sunlight near Liverpool, he built an entire village of many hundreds of homes, which are all standing today. They're actually, you can Google it, Port Sunlight. It's fascinating, but that concept of a company needing to invest in its workforce, needing to care about the community that it operates under, is the core, of our DNA as a business. So the very origins of the company were founded on doing good as we were trying to do well as a business, because the two are fundamentally intertwined. And so that ethos has been shared by generation after generation after generation of leadership. And our current leadership is absolutely no different. As I mentioned earlier, we've cared about sustainability long before sustainability became popular, and now everybody cares about sustainability. It's not marketing; it is real. We've staked the very health and future of our business on sustainability, and then doing good and bringing value back to the communities that we serve. So whether it's in the realm of equity, whether it's the realm of climate, and it's not just ourselves that we hold accountable, it's our entire supply chain as well. And whether it's in practices, related to living wage, in all parts of the world that we operate in, and holding, our partners accountable as well as ourselves for important matters like living wage. These are all things that we believe lead to that sustainable future for the planet that we operate in. And if it's good for communities the world over, good for the health of the planet, we believe it's good for business as well. So our future is placed, our future bets are placed on the intertwine, do good and do well.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. So does Unilever adhere to living wage standards around the world wherever it operates? Is that part of its?
Yeah, so our supply chain team is really hard at work on that initiative. And obviously it's a journey. It's not, that there's a magic wand you can wave and all of a sudden it magically happens all over the world. But that is a huge part of our platform. And our teams are driving that in the communities that we serve and with the partnerships that we have.
But just starting out with your own employees, are the Unilever's employees worldwide paid living wages?
Yes, our employees are paid living
And
wages.
you're saying that you're setting that as a goal for all of your suppliers as well around the world.
Yes,
Wow.
absolutely, for employees and suppliers.
So if I'm running a soap factory in a small town in Venezuela, and that might not be the right country to use as an example, but let's go with it. And there's a Unilever plant in the same town, and Unilever's paying living wages, you also are going to have that influence then, right? I mean, I'm going to need to pay something close to living wages in my own soap factory down the road, no matter what my political and economic and social beliefs might be, just in order to compete for good employees.
That's correct. And we believe that in so doing, and again, doing the right things by our people and the communities that we operate in, we can, again, make sustainable living commonplace. That is the purpose statement of our business. And we know that we alone certainly can't solve the world's ills, but that is a global community, as global businesses coming together, which means we have to push one another in order to, again, lift the standards of living all around the world.
That's extraordinary. And I can only imagine the influence that it has, far beyond just Unilever's employee base. It's fantastic. We have a question about how manufacturing, industrial, logistics employees, people who are working on the line essentially at Unilever, how do you give them opportunities to practice mindfulness? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So our whole person health initiatives that have been refreshed actually since I started, it's been a major initiative of our team, has actually focused on the manufacturing workforce first versus, it's much easier, of course, to focus on salaried office employees because just practically they're easier to reach. We have email addresses, just a lot easier to reach that population. But we've chosen to actually focus on the front lines of our workforce. So these are individuals who are tied, of course, physically to their work. There's no such thing as work from home. These are men and women who've been, at work physically in and out every day throughout the pandemic. And so this is where we need to ensure that we have both digital as well as in-person resources made available to this part of the workforce. And so that whether it's during break time and having the ability to, again, go to our health center, that might be inside a factory, and have a quiet place to sit and breathe and take a moment, or whether that person may want to go home to their families and actually practice with them, where of course now they're no longer physically at work, but to provision then digital tools and to make that available to that entire family unit to practice together. And so it's the marriage of technology and touch, depending on whether the individual is at work or at home, and having that continuity.
Oh, it's very cool. And in countries where breaks are not mandated, is that still a standard for Unilever, that the time is provided in the workday, even for those logistical employees who are on the line?
Our employees have time from off from the lines in terms of that time to do whatever they need to do. Obviously, there's absolutely no way in the course of a workday that an individual could possibly be on an assembly line or doing whatever work they're doing. They have to have time to come off and to attend to their basic human needs. It's Maslow's hierarchy right there. And so we ensure that there is at least a place of quiet that human beings can get to do whatever they need to do for the health of their mind and their bodies.
Is there a place where our friends, we have a specific question about this, is there a place where our friends could go to find out more about mindfulness programs at Unilever, particularly in Latin America? This one of our friends who's with us is particularly interested in how you might deploy mindfulness programs in Latin America. Are there websites, other ways that they could connect with Unilever and your way of doing things?
I'm happy to speak with anyone who wants further information. We have an intranet, but as that implies, it's available to employees of our company. And then we do have a global website, but as you can imagine, for a company with our footprint, it's hard to get to that depth of detail on a global website. But I'm happy to share, any information.
How should people reach you?
Diana.han@unilever.com.
And that's just, ladies and gentlemen, that's just her regular old email address. That's how I reach her too. She just gave out her email address.
I have one email.
What's that? One email address. Yeah. I'm going to give last call for questions. We can go on for a bit longer now, but if you do have a question and you haven't asked it yet and you want to type it into the Q&A section, then we still have time to get a few questions answered. What about for you personally, Diana? What's your mindfulness practice like, and how do you make time, and how did you get started?
So I guess starting with the origin story, although at the time I didn't have a name for it, but so I was born and spent the first few years of my life in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. And at the time, the Vietnam War was still raging on. And so my earliest memories in my life are sensory memories. So sounds in particular, whether it's bombings, whether it's artillery fire, smells, so acrid smoke. Those are the memories of that time of my life. And then my parents took us, my brother and me, and we left as refugees of war. And we then went to a series of successive refugee camps in Subic Bay in the Philippines, in Guam, and then ended up at Fort Chaffee in the U.S., which is how I ended up growing up in the U.S. Again, those sensory memories continued and are what I remember of my earliest childhood. But I think because of those particular transitions, physical transitions in my life, and being a young child at the time, focusing on sensations of the body, and was sort of the first maybe raw, uncurated experiences of what eventually mindfulness would become for me, which is just paying attention to what all of the senses I've been given are telling me about what's going on in my body, in my mind, in the environment and the world that I live in, were the original origins. And then, from there, as I made the decision to go into medicine and then ended up going through a grueling, very long process of education, I just naturally found that through all the stresses and anxieties of the kind of training that medical training involves, quiet places and quiet spaces were just naturally how I could keep myself calm and centered and keep my mind clear. And so sometimes actually to achieve a quiet place, from the time I was a teenager, I would just put my headphones on and listen to music. But there was something about listening to the right kind of music that I enjoyed that actually completely wiped my brain clear and clean, and nothing existed but this incredible, palpable enjoyment of that music. But yet the brain was not working, thank God. It was taking a break.
Would that have been like death metal, or what kind of music?
Oh my God. I don't even remember what those songs in the 90s were anymore, but maybe Journey was in there somewhere.
Journey,
The
absolutely.
funny thing is and the joyful part is my daughters have rediscovered even 90s music because there's so many covers back then. But it started with that, and of course, back then, that there was in the 90s, it wasn't like mindfulness was labeled as such per se. But I just noticed that going to a quiet place and wiping the mind, but yet still so attuned to the physical sensations of the body and the senses, was something that made me feel better. And coming out of those sessions, I would always feel profoundly refreshed. And then from there, it became just a love and interest of lots of different sports. I have a brother, so growing up, we were always, it was like football, it was softball, it was frisbee, it was everything. And then that became, of course, maybe more organized exercise regimes of every sort, from CrossFit to P90X to Shaun T, and on and on and on and on. And so there's I do lose myself, in the moment of working out, and as the endorphins kick in, or sometimes even when I'm running. And in particular, I love to run in the fall and the spring when there's a bite in the air, there's different colors, that the air somehow feels cleaner in certain times of the day, depending on when I can leave the house. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's warm, and the birds are chirping. So just tuning into those things. And as I'm running and I put one foot in front of the other, again, the mind just becomes wiped clean and clear. And all I am experiencing is the moment of. And so just, I think when you feel so much better in that moment of, and your mind is cleansed and you come back feeling so great, mindfulness becomes profoundly easy and something that you crave and need and just naturally do. And then it became when I was too busy and I was taking call every other day at Mass General during my internal medicine residency, then it was all I had time for was breathing. And, at that time, every other day call meant you could be on call 36 hours, go home, sleep, and then get up and do it again right after that. And if I could and sometimes I would have 20 patients show up who had to be admitted, who were incredibly sick, because at Mass General, oftentimes we meet patients from all over the world who needed escalated care, or whose care couldn't be accommodated for at a community hospital. There were sick patients. And all it was just a moment to breathe, just in and out, and the act of breathing always felt better. And it was just really bite sized, only took a few seconds. And that alone was enough to keep my mind calm and to keep my head clear. And so those practices just helped me so much from a quality of life standpoint, a health standpoint, and helped me from a work standpoint. I think I was a better teammate, now a better leader of teams, because I can stay calm, I can stay clear headed, I can stay over my own shoulder. And I think mindfulness helps me not get caught up in false urgencies, which unfortunately too many business leaders get sucked into, because there are a lot of false urgencies in the world. And so, it helps me make sure I've got the right problem statement and I'm focused on all the right things.
Thank you for that. What have I not asked you that you kind of wished I had?
Oh my goodness. I guess, really how I can help this community. There's, a number of individuals who've given their time and commitment to listening to our conversation. And so obviously we are a community. I'm assuming you're here because you have an interest in mindfulness. That's why I gave out my email address. It's just how can I be of help and be of service to those who've been generous with their time to join us today.
Well, I think one of the things that's on a lot of people's minds, and we can tell from, we've received a lot of questions. Thank you all for participating. And one of the things that's on a lot of people's minds is how can they share mindfulness through their own jobs, through their own businesses? What's it like what are things that we can do in a smaller environment than Unilever's to engage our coworkers and our friends? Do you have do you have some ideas about that?
I do, and I'm certainly very empathetic that there are a lot of small businesses that may not be as deeply resourced as a giant multinational. But I think at minimum, it's pretty safe to say that the health of the mind and the body is universally relevant, no matter the size of your business. And COVID, among the silver linings, has only put a spotlight and premium on health and well-being. So I think the first order of business really is sensing what your employees are thinking and feeling and needing. And that's sometimes a matter of just asking. It is literally just asking and asking regularly and with sincerity and knowing what's on the minds of your workforce. We do that a lot, and that's how we know what to focus on. So that's a first order of business, and any business can do that. And in fact, sometimes the smaller your business, maybe the easier it will be to not just send out a survey, but to have focus group conversations and to really keep a finger on the pulse. But the other thing I think that's really important is raising awareness. So making sure that all of the leaders of teams are having very winning conversations with their team members and asking, how are you? And not just, hey, how are you? And then, let's flip to the task at hand, but genuinely, how are you? What's going on, and checking in, whether in person or virtually, is really important. And actually pausing and actually obviously listening with sincerity. And I think that will often surface opportunities, especially when you have enough of the how are you conversations where common themes will emerge. And then from there, I think the keeping health and well-being very top of mind in all conversations, embedded into the fabric of how you support your workforce, will itself reduce stigma, certainly about issues around emotional well-being and mental health. And so raising awareness, reducing stigma, having regular conversations, sensing what's on the minds of the workforce, understanding what the needs are for your workforce, I think are really important. And then from there, there's a ton of resources, including completely free resources that are readily available. Obviously, mindful.org makes a lot of its resources available for all comers, and making those resources available to your workforce. I think those are things all companies can undertake.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of need. Thank you so very much. And thanks to all the folks who joined us this afternoon. It's been a privilege, and I hope you'll come back again for another Leading Mindfully webinar. I actually kind of hope we could have Diana back maybe in a year or so to revisit some of the same things. It's been such a rich conversation with so much valuable information in it. Thanks a million.
Thanks for having me.
Have a
And
wonderful.
thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye.